It's that time of the semester when you can probably see the end of the semester pounding in on you, and I'm really grateful for all of you to find the time to come here. This is a conversation that's important to us on so many different levels. And the very fact that you're here today also shows that we as a campus care about writing, that writing matters to all of us, and that it shapes us in so many different ways. We use writing as a tool to organize our daily lives, to make sense of the world around us, to talk to people that we haven't met in person, to respond to others. And yet oftentimes when we come to college, either as undergrads or grads, we continue to see academic writing as this one thing that remains unchanged and is universal across cultures, disciplines. So what we are hoping to have is a conversation about writing and how each discipline thinks about writing and what it values in writing. Our panelists today are all eclectic writers in their own field, writing for different audiences. We all write for a living, and writing shapes us in so many different ways. Our panelists today are readers, they're writers, they're all passionate educators, and what they'll be talking about today is how they write in their own disciplines, what conventions are really important to them, and how those conventions not only shape their own writing, but the way those conventions also shape the way they read and respond to other people's works, including the works of their students.
So the first questions, what are some of the different purposes of writing in your discipline, and why and when do you write? Do you write to explore? Do you write to analyze? What are those purposes? And we can just go, whoever would like to go first.
Well, I write to communicate science. I mean, it doesn't make any sense to do all this work in a laboratory and not share it with others. It would be really a waste of time if I did all this work and then wasn't interested in sharing it.
And I write about science as well, and so it's just like Paula does, it's not just a matter of communicating what you've actually accomplished in the lab, but you have to get money to actually support your research program. So you have to persuade funding agencies that your work is worthy of funding. And you also, once you get a grant, you actually have to report back to the funding agency that you did great things with the money and that they should fund you again sometime.
I say along the same lines, most of my writing is to report science results, and then also to try to convince funding agencies that the work I'm doing is important and impactful. And if you can do both of those, you should probably be successful.
I'm in the Department of Educational Leadership doing research in social context of education. So I write about social science, about my analysis, my research that I do, similar things to what the other panel members have said. But I think another piece that, besides journal manuscripts and perhaps more persuasive writing, which is a little bit different for the proposals, research reports and briefs, or type of writing towards audiences that are in the practice, to schools, to institutions of higher education. So that writing also changes a little bit as well in terms of its focus and style.
I would say everything everyone else did too, but I would add that a lot of the writing that I do is I'm constantly writing. I'm writing informally about just ideas that are in my head, of snippets of things that jump to my mind, of things that I'm noticing. And all of that writing feeds into these other kinds of writing. And we often don't talk a lot about the informal writing that we do, or the conversations we have with friends through email or other kinds of informal writing that builds up that sort of fund of knowledge that we have that when we're writing grant proposals or more formal pieces feed into that.
Let me add one more thing that hasn't been mentioned. When I write too, I write to educate. And as a journal editor, I take seriously the kind of feedback that we give, particularly to our young scientists, about their research work. And so we take a lot of time with the reviews and the editorial decisions that we make to make sure that people know how to take that next step, what they should do as the next step, and to give positive feedback to encourage people in the writing process.
Okay, thank you. The next question is more of scholarly writing and expectations of your grad students and undergraduate students. What are the kinds of writing that you and your colleagues do as scholars, kind of in that professional world? And then also, are these different from the types of writing you have your graduate students do? And how does that differ from what's expected of writers in the undergraduate fields?
Well, no, we try. Hopefully, in the classroom, what we're doing is training our students to write as scholars. I mean, we certainly aren't doing this just as an academic exercise. The exercises that we use in the classroom may be smaller and more focused than some of the writing we do as professionals, but the end result is to shape the writing so that students will be successful when they try to publish their own work. We try to give them experience across the board. We give them experience writing proposals. We give our students experience with literature reviews. We give them experience with writing research reports. My graduate students write the first draft of all of our publications. I mean, that's the only way to learn, is to practice and seek feedback. I would encourage you to seek every opportunity to write, especially if someone is willing to take the time to read what you write.
I teach research methods, and I teach introductory level research methods to master's and doctoral students. And we do have some common types of things that we do across the master's classes, but the types of assignments that we have students do are related to critiquing research articles and writing research proposals, perhaps more mini proposals, but all types of preparation, again, for dissertation. Or for thesis, or some of our students have more of a type of capstone project. And also trying to incorporate into those assignments some earlier drafts that must be turned in so they can receive feedback, not trying to wait until something gets turned in at the end of the semester and then it can only be evaluated and students can't use the feedback to improve or change.
Yeah, my area, which is writing studies, I try to have both my undergraduate and graduate students become involved in the professional conversation in whatever ways possible. To look at various scholars' blogs and interact there, responding to some of the ideas there, to look at how that conversation unfolds, and to feel as though in whatever place we are, we can be participants in that. We can be learners and figuring out what are the how does these conversations take place. I try to involve as much as I can graduate students and undergrads to attend a professional conference, particularly if they're in this area, to be a part of that, to see how see what ideas people are working on and how they're speaking about it, and to go up and speak to someone afterwards and talk to them about their ideas, particularly if it's something that's close in proximity to the things that you're working on, so that you get to know the community of scholars who are working in areas where you have interest and can get the contours of what that conversation is like.
I agree with everything that's been said. I think what I would add to it is that to learn to become a good writer, you have to read in your discipline very, very critically. So in addition to talking to other scholars in your discipline, it's actually reading what they write, using that as a model for your own writing. So the more critical a reader you become, the better a writer you'll become. Yes.
Going last, I get to basically reiterate what everyone else said. So for me, the four main things that I write: grants, research manuscripts, review articles that both go to researchers and to clinicians. So I am a clinician by trade, and so a lot of our work needs to go back to healthcare providers. So the type of writing changes because you need to get away from the research or the technical jargon and put it more into clinician perspective. And then abstracts, which is kind of a whole unique way of writing to get everything down to the absolute bare minimal information that you can as far as word count. At the undergraduate level, we try to get our students as many different experiences as possible. And one of the areas that I think is always the biggest struggle from transitioning from undergraduate to graduate is the infusion of your own critical thought. It's already been mentioned. Undergraduates, a lot of times we have them write lab reports or review a case study or an article. And so it's kind of a summary of what they've read. And now when you get to a graduate level, you have to not only summarize what you've read, but then put in your own thoughts and synopsis of what it is or what happened and why. And then where does that why take you to do your next question or pose your next research investigation. So at the graduate level, like everyone else here has said, our grad students write first drafts, second drafts, third drafts. Sometimes it's very circular. Right? You might write, and after 3 or 4 revisions, you're almost back to where you started at. But you have to do that, and it's just part of the process. And it gets easier the more you write.
Okay. Going into what you actually write and how you actually write, some of the conventions that DeBarty was mentioning, what are some of the important conventions in your discipline about the actual writing itself? What are some of the challenges you encounter in working with these conventions, and how do you overcome these challenges? What's difficult for when you're actually in there and writing?
Well, when you're writing for science, you have to be succinct, and that's not easy. It certainly doesn't get accomplished the first time you write. And that's why you need the multiple drafts. You're also writing for an audience, and it's very, very important to keep the audience in mind. Sometimes when you've spent so long thinking about an issue and you've developed somewhat expertise in that issue, you understand what everything is, and you can't figure out why everybody else doesn't have that same level of understanding. And it's hard to put across to a reader what question you're looking at, why you developed the insight that you developed, how you're testing this insight, and what you found and what it means. And it's very important in writing for science that you keep the reader in mind and that you tell a complete story from beginning to end without any issues left unsaid. And that takes some experience to do. That's not easy. Few of us are born science writers. Most of us develop with time.
And the same is true for chemistry. And I guess I can say in terms of challenges, so whereas the reader may start at the abstract and start reading the introduction, that's not where I start writing the paper. I start probably in the experimental section because I have all that. I'll start, maybe then it's my results and my discussion. And I don't write the introduction till the very last thing. Actually, the abstract's the very last thing that I write. Maybe the title's the last thing that I actually write on this. But, it's the way you synthesize, it's the way you put it together is not the way the audience is going to actually read it, because you've done experiments, you know why you did them, you know what kinds of points you're trying to make, but it's not until you put the whole study together that you figure out, now how am I going to introduce this to the audience so that they understand the impact of what I'm doing and the significance of it.
Well, I think I would agree that I do mainly quantitative type of research, although sometimes I collaborate with people using more qualitative methods. But something that I've tried recently that I think helps is trying to write that abstract in mind, that what is the problem that I'm addressing? Where is the literature right now? What am I doing, and what are my results? Because I already have them. But if I can write those 5 sentences and know what I've done, then it's easier to make the paper flow for me. Mm-hmm. So maybe not and abstracts are also different in different disciplines, right. In terms of their length and the way they're. Mm-hmm. So, but I found that to be something that has helped me as a junior faculty member. Try and flesh out my papers.
I think my process is much more like Bernadette's, where I wish it were a linear process where I could just say, okay, I wrote the introduction, I'm done, and now I'm going to write the next thing, and I'm done. It's much more recursive. That sometimes when I'm writing in the results section, I realize something that I need to say earlier, or so I have to go back over there, and then as I'm writing something there, it'll occur to me that, you know, I could say this in a different way. And so it's much more back and forth, and ideas come to me not in a kind of linear way. So I'm constantly going back and forth between the review of literature. If I'm looking back at that, might suggest something that I want to say more about in the results section, or results, I want to go back and critique something in the review of the literature that I didn't say but I should have said. So those kinds of things will go back and forth for me.
I would agree. As far as conventions, short, sweet, and to the point. If you can say something in 5 words that you originally wrote in 10, change it to 5. If it gets the same point across, it'll be better for your audience and your readership. Space is the biggest issue. Page counts are dropping, yet they want more and more information and more detail. So it just further emphasizes the need to be very succinct in your writing. For me, I always start with the introduction. I think that's more of my own OCD than anything else. I just have to start there and then work my way through the paper. But it never is finished. It's always you write the rest of the paper and you go back and then you revise particularly the introduction and then the discussion. I often find that it helps me to write something, look at it for several days, and then kind of throw it in the desk drawer, wait several days, and come back with a fresh perspective. And then I do the abstract last, particularly because that is, for me, it's almost if you write the paper and you're happy with the paper, it can almost be a cut and paste, where then you have to tweak and fine tune it, but it's coming from the paper itself.
Okay. Well, we already kind of hit on the writing processes, and we've all got different types of writing processes, but are there any strategies that you think that students can use to become more effective writers in your discipline? Any any further strategies or processes that they can employ to become successful writers?
I think Bernadette said to read. I think that's very important. If you want to publish in a journal, read that journal. That's the best way of modeling what you want to develop. And again, seek feedback. Seek every opportunity to write and seek feedback for your writing. And don't get upset when someone gives you less than positive feedback. That happens, and it's to your benefit. It's not to your disadvantage. You should learn from it.
And you don't learn to be a great writer after writing one paper.
That's right.
I think my writing improved the most by being a department chair, because I read essays that I wrote before and then having to write so much. And it's not necessarily about science, or if it is, it's to a different audience, maybe people that have less of a technical background. But I looked maybe 5 years after being chair, some papers I wrote before I was chair. I was like, wow, I've actually learned how to write. I'm a lot more concise now. I kind of get to the point because I need to, because if I'm trying to ask for resources, nobody wants to read 10 pages and say, oh, this is what you want. They want to know right away what it is that you want and why do you want it.
Read. Show your work to people not only in your field, but also outside your field. If you can show a paper to, I always say my mother, who has no technical knowledge whatsoever, but if my mother can understand what I wrote, or at least a general idea of what I wrote, then it's probably written well. You know the technical aspects are there, and that'll be picked up by peer reviewers, but the general story, and someone mentioned that, the general story of something will come across well.
You know, let me just say, I always tell my kids, don't show your paper to your mother. Because she's going to tell you how great it is, and it's not great. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
I want to build on this idea of reading, because typically when we read in order to gather information, gather ideas. And when you're reading as a writer, you might read a little bit differently. And so you're wanting to, in the journal, say, what is the conversation here? Who are the key players? Who are they looking at? Who are they citing? Getting that kind of sense of what's going on here. And then if you have pieces that actually speak to you, that you want to emulate in some way, then you can read those and say, how are they doing this? What are the turns of phrase?
Mm-hmm.
How are they, how is it put together? Developing this auditory imagination. How does it sound like to be a chemist? Or how does it sound like to be in writing studies? How do these people talk to each other? And then looking at very closely at how the language works.
I don't know how much this varies across, because I'm in education, which is sort of an eclectic area, and pulling on lots of social sciences, but we have a lot of conventions that are related to a particular writing style, which is the American Psychological Association. But some journals use a different style. For example, the American Sociological Association style. And that does take time to change those things in a paper. So that's something that when we were prompted thinking, what do you want students to know, is that sometimes those things that seem pesky can take a lot of time, so you might want to build them in near the beginning of the writing, or if you decide to save them for later, just know that that may take you some time, that is, doesn't feel as productive as actually getting the ideas out, but it's part of that presentation, and the clarity of the presentation will also affect how people judge your writing. When I review manuscripts, when I see, things that look sloppy to me, it does affect how people interpret the ideas as well, as much as maybe it shouldn't, but it just does. So.
And one more thing about the style, that brings up a very important issue. There are differences in discipline for style, but most disciplines, it's really the same. It's just that there are differences in how references are formatted. But it is important, very important, that you attend to the style and write the paper for a particular style. I can't emphasize that enough. And there are reasons for the style. A lot of times I have students tell me, what difference does it make how I format the references? It does make a difference, because when I read a paper as an editor, I'm looking for certain things in certain places. And if I don't find the information in the place that I expected, I reject the paper, because I have to dig too much in order to find it. And you don't want your readers digging too much to understand your work. So it is important to understand the nuances of the style and to keep it in mind as you write the paper.
I think the job we have as writers is to make it easy on the reader, is really what it comes down to. They have certain expectations, they have a certain level of knowledge, certain types of experiences, and you're really just trying to target whatever it's going to take to make it easy for them to understand what it is you're trying to say to them.
Let me add one thing, and I don't know how everyone else feels on this topic, but I always tell my graduate students to get something on paper.
Yes.
I've had several grad students that won't show you anything because they don't want to show you anything till they think it's perfect. And inevitably, it's not going to be perfect. So get something on paper, because only then can you read it critically, you can revise it, you can have other people look at it and revise it. So get something on paper.
That's excellent advice. You've got to start somewhere. That's right. It doesn't have to be perfect.
Yes. What I'm also hearing is this idea of forming ideas. The ideas don't exist in a vacuum. We use writing to form those ideas. And sometimes when we see a finished page, we just assume it came out perfect. But what you see is something that probably took a year in the making, several drafts later. And so what you're using writing as a way of discovering. And it's only when you start writing that the discovery process begins. For some writers, it begins a lot earlier. Many writers tend to percolate in their minds, but getting started is a good way of seeing the ideas and how they look on paper. So forming those ideas becomes extremely critical in the writing process, and that's what we all seem to be coming to agree on.
And I'd actually like some of you to elaborate upon what you're actually valuing in using those styles and formats. You talked a lot about, you had mentioned that an editor would look at very specific things, look to make sure that things are in the right places. What types of things would an editor look for, or someone who is reading that paper in that discipline? What would they expect that paper to sound like? What would they expect that paper to contain? What would be kind of off-putting for them if it was different?
In a paper, you're looking for some contribution to the literature, of course, something that we didn't know before, so you've got to have something of value to talk about in the first place. What's off-putting is when you see a paper that's poorly done. Mm-hmm. You see a paper with any sort of mechanical errors. In today's day and age with computers at your fingertips, there should be no reason for any grammatical errors or any spelling errors. Mm-hmm. As soon as you see these kinds of sloppiness in the document, it suggests a sloppiness in the way the data was collected as well, and that's off-putting. Mm-hmm. Other than that, I can't think of anything else that would be off-putting, except you have an instance where you have a paper that doesn't contain anything new. There's nothing, no new ideas in what you were looking at.
For me, it would also, I agree with all that, it would also be if it's not very concise. So if someone takes you on a journey around the world to make one little point, it's there's a lot of journal articles to read, and so when I pick up an article, I want to know, what is this about? Is this something I'm actually interested in reading? So I want to know right away, is this worth my time to read? If not, I'm going to go read something else. So being very clear and to the point about what it is that you're trying to say in the paper.
I think when I feel that our colleagues right now are speaking more about that level of something that's going to be published, but when I look at assignments as well for classes, things that are off-putting are when, and this I think happens in some fields more than others, when it's hard to distinguish the person's opinion from them summarizing someone else's opinion, because for some of the students that come to our graduate programs, they haven't done much academic style writing. It's probably been a lot more self-reflective, or and that doesn't translate well to the writing style that we're expecting to be able to critique research and clearly distinguish when you're summarizing someone else's ideas and when you're making a statement about your appraisal of that. So that's an area where I find that some students have to work a lot. Some have already not mastered, but some have already well on their way to it, but others are still not able to do that.
Sandra, you're also talking about two different ways of responding to a draft. And Paula, you're talking about responding to a more finished piece, where you're keeping an eye on minor surface level issues that become a mark of sloppiness. But sloppiness itself is contextual, because when you're responding to a first draft, you may not be responding to those minor sentence level issues. Is that true?
I think you notice it in the first draft as well. I mean, altogether, if you have this sense of, that I'm trying to remember what I wrote here, this sense that evidence of thought and engagement, because of course I'm dealing a lot with people critiquing articles, and trying to formulate their first literature reviews, and if there's no sense of engagement, and synthesis of the material, even at the first draft, I think that's also something that is a concern, something that needs to be worked on.
Sometimes I found that when I'm attending to the ideas, that there might be mistakes that I make. And because I'm not paying attention to that, I'm paying attention, working so hard on the idea. And then I notice it, like when I print it out, move it from the screen and just say, let me look at it over here and go, oh, I got to change this, because I wasn't attending to that. I wasn't thinking about that. And so I kind of moved back and forth between conventions and then, that kind of stuff I have to go back to attend to. Because when I'm thinking about ideas, it's really, I'm kind of have to be in a kind of space, a deep place that, so it's not in my focal awareness that I'm needing to do certain kinds of things, although I know I need to do them at some point. And then I was thinking about how, when is it that when there's a disruption, like when I get something, when I was editing a journal a few years back, when I get a piece that didn't seem written for that journal, but somebody just thought, oh, I'll just send it there.
Yeah, that's right.
So it was kind of not in the conversation. So I think, and those were interesting ones to try to write back to say something encouraging, but also that maybe you should look at what we actually talk about over here. So knowing what the conversation is, and then how that sort of when you were talking about the critical engagement, or as a writer coming into that conversation, like what does it look like? When somebody says this is somebody who's really engaged with the material, what does engagement look like, and can we point to it and look at it, and then begin to see how we could change what we're doing to appear more in this other way.
And also, for those who find writing difficult, one way of approaching it too is to give a presentation about what you've done. Sometimes that helps too. Sometimes when I have students who are reluctant to write something up, I'll tell them, well, tell me what it's all about. Give a presentation about that work. And you think through the different steps, and you know what your weaknesses are when you give a presentation, because people ask you about them. And it helps you to think through the different parts, and you know what you need to work on when you're writing.
Okay. Well, is there anything else that you'd like to include about writing in your discipline, or things that you think that students should really know or understand when they're getting into these disciplines, or even in others that you see?
One point I'd really like to make is, we were talking earlier about, if you have a sloppy document, if there's grammatical errors, spelling errors, and how off-putting that is. That goes not only for, writing a journal article or a proposal, but if you're applying for a position someplace, all they may know about you is the paper they have in front of them, your cover letter, your CV, and it's so critical to make sure that is written very, very well, that you don't have little mistakes in it, because that's all they know about you. And like it or not, it may be unfair, but that's how they're judging you, is based on those few sheets of paper they have in front of you. So I strongly advise to start on those things early and get people to read them over for you, and try to get some really good critical feedback, so that what you're sending out is really, really good.
What was very interesting to me is we're not only talking about discipline-based conversations, we're also talking about journal-specific conversations. And in order to understand conversations, you have to identify key journals in your field and try to understand how people are participating in those conversations and the moves they're making to enter those conversations. And that two journals in the same field can have very different approaches towards writing, and it's an important distinction to keep in mind.
And in talking about journals too, I mean, you'll all try, I hope, to write for a journal before you get out of here, because that certainly helps you get a job. When you do so, don't expect your first effort to be successful. And don't be discouraged by the fact that you get rejected. We all get rejected. I've got file cabinets full of rejection letters. But you should write to the top tier journals just for the feedback. Just see what they say. And then you can then submit to a lower tier journal based on the feedback that they give you. But you'll get good advice at a top tier journal, and that'll help you to rewrite so that your next effort will be a stronger effort.
It's an iterative process. Almost nobody just sends the first draft in and that's it. Most of the drafts, even by top people in the field, it might be accept with even minor revision.
Oh, yeah.
Right? No one ever says publish as is. You don't have to do anything to improve it. So it's back and forth, and just expect that. You're going to get something back that you're going to have to do something with it.
Right.
One thing I would, maybe another way I could say the same thing is, you should when you're writing something, immerse yourself in the genre that you're writing. So, not, for many of my students, many times, like if we're having them do like a microethnography or whatever, if they've never read one, how could they possibly do one? So, so immersing yourself in the genre to see what it's like to do that. So if you're writing a dissertation proposal, go read a bunch of them. If you're writing a dissertation, go read some, see what they're like, because they're unlike a lot of other things, you know, and they're very much constrained by their own kinds of rituals and procedures that have to be there for dissertation proposal, but maybe not so for grant proposal.
And I would also recommend, if you want to write a journal article, don't do it all in one day. I mean, you want to do a little bit every day, because even though you're not writing, you'll write a little bit and you'll think about it while you're doing other things, so that when you come back to it the next day, you've got a new perspective on what you wrote. So, you know, don't hold yourself up in a room and do it all in one shot. It's just not going to be a very effective way of writing.
Yeah, I think that was something that we really hadn't talked about so much, you know, thinking about the practice part of it. I mean, I don't always achieve it, but, you know, try and figure out what can I write or be focused on that writing project for 1 hour a day.
That's right.
What's my best hour of the day? I mean, it's something for me I need to sort of come to fresh. It can't be at 11 o'clock at night that I go, oh, geez, now, you know. So we all have our own different, you know, personal constraints as well with time, but you know, I agree with Dr. Vocation's suggestion about approaching it. And also, I think that when you have classes, of course, deadlines are set for you, but when you have other writing projects, like your dissertation or like, well, proposals are due a certain date, but I want to write a journal article, well, there may often not be any type of deadline set, so you have to set your own deadlines. You have to be thinking and setting, you know, those deadlines. If I want to submit it by this, you know, what are my goals along the way? Because particularly when you get to become a faculty member and have so many other responsibilities, you know, you have to, other things can just eat up all of your time, so.
One of the best pieces of advice that I ever received as a graduate student was to write something every day, whether it be get a couple of sentences down. Some days will be great and you might find you get a whole page or 2 pages down. Other days you might spend hours on a single sentence. But you're always trying to write and getting something down. Nowadays, I feel like I spend most of my time responding to emails, but it's, I guess, still writing. It's not just what I would like to be writing on, though. So try to find a time to write something every day.
I found it helpful also, since the writing is broken up among a variety of days, is when I'm done writing for that day, maybe I just can't do anymore, I have to go and do something else, is to just write to myself, okay, what's the next thing I'm going to do on this? Which section am I going to work on? What's the next thing? So that when I go back to it the next day or sometimes the next week or longer, I don't have to go back and figure out where I was. I gave myself instructions on what I need to work on next.
The hardest part for me is getting started writing, so I try not to stop. You know, I just, I think that's what we're all saying here. It's real hard to go stare at a blank page. You know, it just really is. That's the hardest part. So if you're filling up pages, if you're doing some things every day, it really does help you keep a momentum going.
Yeah. The myth of the brilliant writer who writes brilliantly every time he sits down in his ivory tower is really a myth. Most writers are extremely hardworking people, and they have a routine that works for them. So finding that routine is extremely important. One of my own advisors in grad school had a 15-minute-a-day rule. Have a fixed time every day, just 15 minutes. And he said that if you're working sincerely for 15 minutes on your dissertation for 2 or 3 years at a time, you know, in one stretch, you will have something substantial that will not freak you out at the last minute. And so he would advise his students that by the time you're at the end of your first or second year, you know what you're going to work on. Spend 15 minutes, half an hour in writing, and write consistently for 1 or 2 years. You'll have something to fall back on, and you can always go back and refine what you're thinking about, and that's extremely important.
I'll add one thing too. For me, my writing kind of floats on a sea of talk, And so if you're ever around me, I'm always bothering people with what I'm writing, talking about it, and and it also makes me think I'm actually doing it if I'm talking about it. So I will say, I've got this, I'm working on this piece right now, and I just start talking about it to another colleague who gets interested, and then they say, well, tell me more, and oh, have you read this or that? And I go, oh, okay, I'll get those things, and you can get it gives you a feeling like I'm doing this. Sure. And talking to colleagues about what you're working on is generative.
I think that also goes back to the idea of the professional conferences that you were talking about. It's not just for networking and for knowing people for later, but it's also for gathering sources and forming your own ideas even further.
That's right. It also makes me think of one thing. We not only need to be writers, we also need to be archivists in some way, maintain a trail of what we're doing instead of seeing them as scattered pieces. Kind of being disciplined enough to save all your work, even if it's an email you sent out to someone about what you're thinking about. Just keep that trail. That's important because in many ways you're trying to map your own intellectual history over a period of time, and that's so important in writing as well.
Maybe they have questions.
We were going to go ahead and go to that. And is there anything else that you guys would like to add before we go to the question and answers? Okay, well, we'll go ahead and open that up to the questions and answers. Does anybody have a question they'd like to pose?
I heard you talk about a reading section. I think it's kind of important, especially when I'm writing. I just feel I spend most of the time reading and searching to get idea. And I just have a question. It's not for the academic writing. It's just for if you wanted to improve your writing skill. You might, like you said, reading. But too many reading materials. So do you have any suggestion what kind of reading material would be good? Because I found some novel, they're not really good at reading. I just realized.
Well, what's your discipline?
It was just formal or informal. It's not really for the academic purpose. I would just want it to be more precise or concise the writing skill. Try to practice to improve it.
Yeah, I would say that there's not the sort of good writing, concise writing that's independent of a conversation. So when Paula was asking you, what field are you working in, her motive for that question was to say that you need to know what conversation you want to talk, or who you want to talk to.
Yeah, mine is kind of the Harris administration, but my interesting it was just like a journal writing. It's not like a specific focus on some field. I'm just sometimes I just confuse how I can improve my English writing skill. So I go look at the reading materials, so many, and I'm just confused which one I should pick up to, look up.
That's what makes it so complicated, I think, is that there's not just one place. That there are different ways and different, there's different ways people talk in different conversations, or write into different conversations. And so knowing which ones you want to join would help you get the kinds of language and arguments and things that you want to say into those places.
That's good advice. I mean, if you like to read something, that's important. I mean, that's what you should be reading, and that's what you should be emulating in your own writing. So if you don't like it, then don't read it. Choose something you like to read.
Right. So I more often than not, I actually follow what you said about right to make it clear, right to be succinct, and right to educate. One of the feedback I get so clear that they start questioning my novelty. That they think, well, it's if you write to make sure everything was clear, it become like they understand it, but then now they think, oh, this should it affect the novelty of my contribution. And I think I'm asking for the balance between you make it clear, but then you have to make it also novel. You have a straight balance between the two.
What profession are we talking about? What discipline?
Computer science.
Even in I write in computer science and cognitive science, and I guess I don't understand that, because there's a professional level of writing that you need to work from. It can't be so clear that you're not using the terms and definitions of the science. So you do have to be knowledgeable enough about the science to use their terms and definitions. But professional writing and novelty are really two very different things. I mean, you do need to make a contribution. You have to be knowledgeable about what came before you and push forward. I mean, I guess I don't understand that trade-off.
Well, as some papers, I don't know if it's a bad practice or not, but that makes it so confusing that people think that you, I don't know if you experience that. Okay, I have another question.
Okay, good.
You've stumped the panel.
So you said that you should write abstract last on the order you write, on the method, on the discussion, experiment, and then abstract introduction. Most of the stuff I worked on, they only request abstract first. Like even before you submit paper, it has to be the abstract like a month in advance. And usually I had to revise the abstract afterwards.
Yeah.
Do you think that should be changed?
No, I think I think the takeaway message is that different people have different approaches to how they have their writing. So it's not our goal to give you a prescription for how you have to write every paper. That works out well for me, but for some of the other panelists, they approach it a different way. If I'm presenting a paper at a conference, they need the abstract first. So I haven't even maybe put a talk together. I know what I'm going to put into it. I may write a paper after it, but of course I have to write the abstract first. So, you know, I think that the takeaway should be you're hearing what some of us who have been writing longer than most of you have learned and what has been helpful for us, and for you to take away what might be helpful for you. But there's not one right way to do it.
I want to go back to your other question about because I mean, it's an interesting one about when you're reading something that you think, what are they saying? Or this really wasn't written for me in mind because I have no idea what it is. And those are interesting places for me because I know in my own teaching when I give professional essays, you know, published essays out to a class to look at, and I'm thinking, oh, this is very clear. But for them, it's like, say what? What is this? You know, and I realize that I'm bringing a lot to that text. I even know the people who are being cited. You know, we grew up in the profession together, so it's not just vaguely. It's Lester. You know, I know the person who has written this, and I know the other pieces he's written. So this statement that he says is in a context of my reading of that. So the more you know about your field, the more you begin to understand some of the questions about what's clear and concise and what you can forecast through your citations and other kinds of things. And so you're kind of learning about clarity is not just a simple matter of simple sentences with subject, verbs, and objects, but it really is a highly crafted skill of knowing what the reader is expecting to see and how you can shortcut some things you might want to say by standing on the shoulders of some of the people in the field.
That's yes, I think she gave you some very good advice. I mean, when you're writing for a professional journal, there is a professional level of writing that you need to develop. It's not so simple that your mother would understand it. I mean, there's a background knowledge there, and you need to develop that kind of understanding. And the only way to do it is by reading the journal, okay? Even if it's difficult, and even if you have to read it more than once.
We talked about writers needing other writers, writers needing other readers. One wonderful resource on campus is the Writing Resources Center. We are open 9 to 6 on almost all weekdays. We also have Sunday hours. So go online, look at the Writing Resources Center, get in touch with us, and you can continue having these conversations with tutors who are extremely dedicated and committed to writing and who are happy to talk to you about your writing and are happy to assist you at any stage of the writing process itself. So come by and see us.
If you need help with ideas, or if you have already gotten something written, if you already have something down on paper, no matter where you are in that process, you can come see someone in the Writing Center. It's not just for a finished product for a second set of eyes, but it's for absolutely any stage in that process.